In this section, I'm going to talk about the importance of API design. Great APIs make your service usable to customers. But a very important thing here is that you can't take a service that was designed poorly and think you're going to put a beautiful API on top of it and make everything work really well. If the service is poorly designed, you really should go and fix the service. Otherwise, your API will have struggles with it, the abstractions won't be right, and in perpetuity over time, you will be struggling with things like documentation, customer support, and trying to maintain the abstractions in a really nice way. So it's really critical that the API is really the face to the customer, but it sets the stage for how the service should be working behind that API. Before releasing your initial API to customers, it's critical to invest significant design effort into this, and then get customer feedback on it, and then keep iterating on the design. The time you spend up front will pay off orders of magnitude down the road. This is especially important to get this feedback in the version 1 of your service, because it's version 1 that establishes the abstractions of your service. It's version 1 that establishes the patterns that customers are going to use to access the service. And then future versions are just smaller incremental changes that happen over the time. I see a lot of services where they don't spend a lot of time up front, and then we really struggle down the road. It's important to spend and invest that time up front. And then if you're building this service, you're building it for customers. So you want to understand the kind of applications your customers are building where they might find value in depending upon your service. The way we recommend doing that is that you define these hero scenarios, and then the operations that are required to implement the hero scenarios, and then you design the API so that your customers can implement those hero scenarios in the smoothest way possible with the least amount of friction. Everything feels natural. In other words, approach the design from the customer's perspective to the service. Think about what the customer wants to do, and then design the API and the service to match that. All too frequently, we see service teams build the service, then they start showing it to customers. They didn't really have a good idea in place as to what it is the customers were going to do with it. And now the customers, there's an impedance mismatch between what the customers want and what the service provides. And that can cause the customers to really struggle with the service. And if that struggle starts in version 1, it's probably going to maintain that struggle over multiple versions, especially if you're trying to maintain backward compatibility, which we on the Azure team, we really want to maintain this backward compatibility over time. Breaking changes are very, very hard to introduce by design. So I talk about these hero scenarios and how important they are. And they're important for many reasons, but I mean, the overarching goal is that they end up reducing development costs. So how do they do that? Well, you will, if you think about your hero scenarios, you will spend less time designing other less used or fringy kind of features. And you will spend the most amount of time investing in the features that your customers use most often. And then a thing that we highly recommend is that you don't add APIs for speculative features customers might want. I get into meetings a lot of times where the team says, well, we did this because we think customers might want this, but they don't know for sure if they want it. So they're doing the extra work of creating the API and then testing the API, documenting the API, writing samples for the API. They'll have to support that API. They have to wrap that API with client library code in multiple programming languages. And then you'll have to version that thing over time. One thing that I learned over my years is that creating a new API is 1% of the effort. And everything else I just said is the 99% of the effort. See, a lot of developers say, well, I could write that API in an hour, and you probably can. But the amount of effort to support it in perpetuity is through the roof. So it's always easy to add features later, but it's very hard to take features away once you've introduced them. And because services, you can, create new versions of them every month or every day if you wanted to, you can add features in a very timely fashion. So highly, highly, highly recommend you go that route. The other nice thing about hero scenarios, it reduces the time getting your team aligned on what are the goals of the service and what are your priorities in implementing those goals. Having these hero scenarios are a powerful way to illustrate API needs and a great way to motivate the team to be working on the right things. Good hero scenarios will also reduce time that you're discussing and debating alternative approaches to things. It can settle debates more quickly with use cases on the team. And finally, having these good hero scenarios, you'll spend less time reworking designs. Over and over again, you'll be creating a design that works really well for the customer, which goes back to what I was saying on the previous slide, where get your customers involved in your previews, get that feedback from them, and keep iterating until you have a great API design. Talking more about iterating on your API design, make sure that you write samples that illustrate the application scenarios. Put yourself in the customer's shoes and empathize with them. Ask customers to use your APIs. Where do they get stuck with certain things? Maybe it's the concept or the abstraction that they're problem with, or maybe it's more like nitty-gritty with the code. Perform usability studies, which can be very expensive and time-consuming, but a cheaper way to do that is to just have previews, public previews, where you document things and you have samples, everything's all lined up, and then you have customers go and work with the previews. A little bit later on in the course, I'll also be talking about how you can version previews over time. And also having the usability studies and previews will give you insight into how customers are thinking about the problems. And this can be really insightful to you and your team that's building the service. And then finally, review the APIs with experienced architects, which have worked with many service teams. You want to do this to make sure you're following the consistent patterns and the web standards, but also if your company creates a lot of different web services, you want them to all have some kind of consistent feel to them. So by having some kind of experienced architects that can kind of help this team today and that team tomorrow, they will see the different kind of things that are happening, learn that experience, but also share with those teams, well, this team did it this way, you might want to consider this. This team did it this way. Our normal way of doing this is by doing this, and so on.